Hello and welcome to the Odyssey, navigating the early career clinician researcher waters. Join us as we delve into the journey of two poor souls paving their way in medicine and research. Welcome to the Odyssey. I'm Simon Couillard from the University of Sherbrooke, and today I'm joined by Imran Satia from the University of McMaster. Hi, Imran.
Hi, good afternoon, Simon. Thank you for having me.
Would you like to present yourself for our audience, so they have an idea?
My name is Dr. Imran Satia. I'm a respiratory physician, clinician scientist here at McMaster University and the Firestone Institute for Respiratory Health at St. Joe's Hospital. I'm now an associate professor and Canada researcher in chronic cough.
Fantastic. And I think you've just finished your early career researcher stretch. So you're now mid-career. Is that possible?
That's right. Officially, I started in April 2020. So my 5 years as an early career researcher has now ended. So I'm now probably in my mid-career.
Fantastic. And yes, we are both respirologists, but it's important to say what we're going to say is very specialty agnostic. So we're going to talk about clinician scientist problems with budgets today. So just to remember, at the last two episodes, we've learned how to negotiate our protected time and set up our clinic. But now I think we're realizing that we have a small business to run, which was a big surprise for me because as a scientist, I wasn't expecting it. Were you, Imran? Were you expecting to be a business manager when you started?
No one really prepares you for that. People, you always expected to write grants and papers. But the business side of things and bringing in the funds is a whole new story.
Yeah, and no one really taught. I mean, I had great mentors, but no one really taught me how to manage the budget. And I wanted to start with my horror story, Imran, which actually this is why I'm inviting you today because you're the one I moaned about it. So my first investigator-initiated study by a pharmaceutical study company was called Prisma. That's not important. The important thing is that it was a prospective observational study that should have been budgeted for 400 or 500K, and I asked 200. So the small story is that it was a contest which we could ask up to 1 million. And once you're approved, this I learned in the late side, but once you're approved for a grant, usually you can budget as much as you need. And the company will tell you if it's not sufficient, but they won't reject you afterwards because you over budgeted. So yeah, classic story. And the person who heads the grants, he said I was the only one not to ask $999,999.99. So yeah, so that's my horror story. So let's start from there. So I want to start in the initial part of our podcast, Imran. Can you talk to us about, for example, your startup situation when you started at McMaster, just to recap what we've said in the past? Yeah,
sure. So when I was starting as an assistant professor at McMaster in 2020, I'd been there for about 2 years, and I was recruited into the lab of Professor Paul O'Byrne, and our lab is a multi-PI lab. So there was Professor Paul O'Byrne, Professor Gail Gavreau, and Professor Roma Semi, and I was the other physician. So, and I had my own salary support from the ERS when I was a postdoc. And then when I was recruited, I had my own salary support. But I must say, I didn't negotiate particularly hard to have my own startup fund separately because I was walking into a lab where I had fridge, freezers, centrifuge, MSD platforms. We had 4 study coordinators, 2 research technicians, space, bronchoscopy suite. So I had lots of benefits in kind, which probably was valued at least 200,000 per year. So I was very fortunate that I didn't really have to hire anybody in the first year or two. And then I did get, when I was a postdoc, I started writing my own grants. And I was successful in getting some small investigator-initiated studies which were about 300,000. So, but that goes away very quickly, as we'll talk about. So that's how I started initially.
So a very different story than what we heard in the past, but I guess you had a lot of in-kind startups. So
Absolutely,
personnel, personnel, equipment, lab space. For me, I started with a 100K startup, Canadian. And I had access to good equipment, and my previous mentor who retired handed me a very nicely trained research professional staff that I had around 50% of the time paid for. So actually, still, Yeah, my startup still only lasted, I think, less than a year. So the message, I think, is you need to hit the ground running, don't you, Imran? So that 300K was probably key. And how did you diversify your funding portfolio afterwards? So, of course, you had that investigator-initiated fund from a pharmaceutical company, I think.
So I always think of, there's essentially 4 ways of getting funds into your research program or into your business. Firstly is the investigator-initiated studies, which you can apply to GSK, AstraZeneca, Sanofi, Regeneron. There's lots of programs. Secondly, from grants from CIHR, but there's also lots of small charities and PSI and other institutions which also give funds. So I apply to those.
So for our listeners, CIHR is like the NIHR or the NIH of Canada. So it's our public funding organization.
So that's the second part. The third part is I did, not immediately, but I was being asked to do some clinical trials for drug companies, which were multi-center studies. And initially I resisted, but then I started recruiting more patients into cough, asthma, and COPD studies. So that helped me as a third part. But I tended not to do too many of them, particularly if I wasn't going to get academic credit for it. So I wasn't that interested in doing research studies and recruitment and putting all the effort in when I wasn't going to see any future academic output, which is what our universities want us to do, is publish papers and grants. And the fourth is donations, which you can use for endowments. So those are the 4 main areas. There's a 5th area, which is now developing, where you can develop some innovation or something that you do, or copyright or license, which allows you to generate income every time somebody uses it or wants to buy it from you. So those are the areas which I've eventually now grown into. Initially it was just 1 or 2 streams. Now, thankfully, there's almost 5 streams of income that can come and keep your lab going.
So I think we both agree that the public funding traditional route of only having a CIHR or NIH or NHR grant is slowly dying away with the low funding rates, 9% acceptance rates in Canada, which is similar to elsewhere, but still possible and doable, still very favored by our universities. I wanted to talk about industry trials because you did talk about that. And I do hear that often. So let's say a negative view on industry trials. So for people listening to us who don't know, when you run a phase 1, 2, 3, and a bit less phase 4 trials for a pharmaceutical company, you are handed a very stringent and tough list of inclusion and exclusion criteria with for example, 17 visits to do with a patient for a year. And you have a target. For example, in our center, it's often two patients to randomize to the study, and a stipend to reimburse the patient costs, but also to have some profit. So it's between, for example, $25,000 and $75,000 for a randomized patient. We only take trials that we're scientifically interested in and medically interested for our patients, of course. We never take a trial that, even if it's paying, we don't care if it's not good for our patient, of course. These are obviously drugs that we want to try in our patients. And how does it work in McMaster? So that, let's say you finish a trial, how does the excess funding look like? So for me, it's around a 30 or 40% profit I make from a trial like that. Where does what is the mechanism?
So I probably, for some of these clinical trials in cough and asthma, I don't think we make that much profit, to be honest. We probably, for each patient, if I remember, for some of our phase 2, phase 3 study, it was only in the region of about 30,000 per patient. But these were shorter studies, 1 month studies or 6 month studies. But the advantage is that at the end of the term, the university does allow you to then move your funds into a general residual account, which you can then use for whatever reason that you wish to use it for. So that is an advantage, that you can move funds into a residual account. But yeah, I don't think I make huge amounts. I probably recruit enough so that I can pay my study coordinator and have a bit left over for travel and maybe for a student.
Yes, so that's a bit similar for me. So I actually run between 3 and 6 trials. So I run quite a lot, but that makes me have 4 research coordinators that are paid by, they're self-paid basically. They like telling me that. They like saying, I'm not their boss, they're paying themselves. And they're right, actually. And these study coordinators, this is the way Ian Pavard worked in Oxford. So my study coordinators work in my clinic with me.
Yes.
So they help me in the clinic to see more patients, identify more patients, not only for my sponsored trials, but also my personal trials, which makes it easier for my own research program. And they have usually very bright people that work in industry trials because it takes quite a lot of dedication.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right that you should view that somehow you have to bring in the salary of at least one study coordinator for each trial that you do, if ideally more. And you need to have these study coordinators ideally in your clinic, so that every potential patient who's coming, you're seeing, if there's an opportunity to recruit into a study, then that person gets into a study, or at least offered an opportunity to enter the study. So that really helps.
And the patients are also appreciative of, they have a trust because they are followed by someone, a respiratory therapist or a nurse who knows them and then discusses a trial. And there's a bit of trust built there. So I just find it easier for the patient as well than being tossed around between different patients, different people. And but you raise a good point about the personal costs.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the actual budget, Imran. And I appreciate
that. One point I want to make.
Oh, yes.
To be honest, people are sometimes very reticent or reluctant to engage with industry studies. But I've actually found most our industry colleagues, they're actually very positive when we go to them with our own idea that we want to run a translational study or a mechanistic study. And we want, some funding from them and some maybe drug and placebo. That if it's a good idea, and you're in charge and it's your idea, you write the protocol, you do everything, and they just provide the funding, it actually can be a very fruitful academic career because you actually get a lot of academic output out of those studies because you're in charge.
Investigator-initiated studies, right?
Yes. So I do think you have to have a balance of all those types of studies, and I've actually found working with industry quite positive generally. Actually, all the companies.
Yeah. So as someone mentor previously told me, these people are not selling cocaine; they're selling medications that we actually prescribe for our patients because they need them. So it's not. You just need. Everyone has their interests, so you need to talk about. You need to think about what's good for the patient, of course. I'd like to talk a bit about the budget. It's always a big problem for me, the budget. I'd like you to walk us through a novice investigator or a fellow finishing. Yeah. What does a personnel cost? What does a staff cost? Yeah. How do you calculate that?
So one full-time equivalent staff here at McMaster, a basic study coordinator, you're looking at a minimum of around $65,000 to $70,000 plus fringe benefits and fees, which could be another $12,500. So that's the entry-level person. It's probably going to cost you about $75,000. But somebody who's been working there for a long time is likely going to be in the middle or the end of that salary scale. So you're probably at the very minimum should budget about $100,000 to $120,000 per year for a one study coordinator full-time equivalent. That's been my experience of the cost of a study coordinator. And then the other thing which I would recommend you do very carefully is for every funding agency, just look very carefully at what their limits are for PhD students and postdocs and what your university's limits are. So, for example, recently you might have known that the cost for a PhD has gone up to maybe almost 30,000, I think. And for a postdoc, it's gone up to 65 or even 70,000 in some places. So these are some of the costs that you've got to bear in mind. And don't always, people tend to forget the benefits, the cost of the benefits for the dental, the health, and union fees and the rest of it. You have to pay. The PI has to pay for that.
Yes, so a lot's in there. So I would recommend. I don't know if you agree to budget the oldest, a more experienced line of salary possible for a staff. That way, you're always allowed to do that, and it's excusable. Yeah. The benefits vary according to your hospital or your university. So both of those institutions have different benefit percentages. Yeah. And are your staff unionized? Because that has been something of interest in my university.
Yes. Our staff generally are here. Our university staff are unionized. Yeah.
Which I think is the best way for them, because of
Yeah,
course, obviously, no one
that's-
wants to work in research if there's no security, and I'm very pro-union.
Yeah.
The only thing I wanted to say is that when I started, the union obviously discusses and negotiates with the university without speaking to the researchers. So there was this big 20% increase in salary, which I'm very happy for them, and it was a tough sell to come back to my employees and explain to them that I'm not yet at the point of getting that raise. So I was allowed with the union to pay them below what meant. I'm happy to say, as of yesterday, I've hiked up their salary. So I'll probably be ahead of this podcast to look good.
Yeah.
I've hiked up their salary to make it up to the unions.
Amazing.
But yeah, so I know, but I just want to say that, even if you budget something out, it's usually safe to add a 5% per year of indexation.
Yes, you should add the increment. If you're going to have somebody over the next 3-4 years, you should add their increase every 5% every year.
Yeah, even if you could think as a junior investigator indexation should be 2 or 3%, but no, just put 5% and that's fine. Okay, other big ticket items, equipment. So I just like to say, me and you, we were very lucky. We got a lot of equipment. But I've been able to, when I arrived, ask the faculty for unused, balances or, small equipment centrifuges that were hanging around by previously active but now retired researchers.
Yeah.
Borrow when you can from a person on your level, for example, or co-pay the maintenance fees, and outsource with platforms. Do you want to explain to people what a platform is or what a core facility is?
So most universities these days will have core facilities where they will allow you to use their services on a cost recovery basis, like flow cytometry, histology slides, doing immunohistochemistry, fluorescence. They have machines that do this, and or even ELISA, MSD platforms, ELA platforms, cytokine measurements. And instead of shipping these out samples to other places, which can be often very costly, you can do it in-house at much cheaper prices, and you don't have to worry about all of the transportation costs, which can also be substantial. Often people forget about cost of transport, and now particularly if you're going to send to the US, it's a major tariff issue, and we avoid at all costs trying to send samples to the US, and every university now has got rules about sending things across the border. So and shipping is a significant cost as well. So don't forget about shipping.
I have a horror story about equipment. When I was a young researcher, I invested $25,000 in this nifty point of care test for blood, which I was recommended by another researcher. So I think that's always a good point, to get a recommendation by another researcher on an equipment. Unfortunately, we couldn't know this, but the company failed, and actually after 1 year just went bankrupt. So the equipment turned off and was not able to be opened up again. So so fancy machines and with bells and whistles, I think just beware.
One advice I give people is that most of the equipment that we buy, particularly high-end, high-cost things, if you speak to the company and explain to them that you're a researcher, you're not, you've got limited funds, they actually will give you a big discount. So don't look at the price of even for antibodies. If I ring Abcam or Thermo Fisher, they'll often give you some for free as a sample and just to get going. So you've got to really negotiate every line item. And even for the big things, sometimes I will lease things for a year to say, I'll give you the lease money for a year to borrow it, to use it. And then if I want to buy it, then I have the option of buying it at the end of the year or after 2 years. That gives you a buyout kind of, it's a bit like either you want to buy the car or lease the car. Some people prefer the lease because you're not going to spend all that money up front and of $25,000. So that's another option that you can negotiate. So one of the things that I've learned about equipment and all these things, buying things, that you really got to become a good negotiator. And I've been I for example, in my PhD, I got spirometers, phenol machines for free.
Now you're making me jealous, Imran.
Yeah.
So start.
You have to acknowledge them in the paper, saying thank you for the company for giving us free phenol machine. But it doesn't cost you anything to write that.
So for equipment as well, I think when budgeting, a bit in the same line as budgeting the highest bracket of salary for a research personnel who might be experienced but might not be in the end, I would always budget the full price, list price of the equipment, and make sure with the company they know I'm an academic, and then I might review that price in the future. Although I guess to your point, that might remove some negotiation power.
Yeah.
Okay, hidden costs nobody warns you about. Can you tick a few boxes for us, Imran?
Yeah,
Things
I'll
that
tell
maybe
you
a
things
rapid
that,
fire.
yeah. So firstly, check with your institution, whether it's university or the hospital, what their overheads are. It used to be 30% here at McMaster, now it's 40%.
Same.
So you've got to be aware of that additional cost, and it can be substantial. Secondly, publication fees these days are enormous.
I paid. I like saying I published in Lancet. It's always fun to say in a podcast, but actually that was $7,500
Oh wow!
publication fee, open access. So in
Really?
Lancet Respiratory, yes. So so a very.
Wow.
I mean, I write grants for $10,000 sometimes. So I mean, that's a huge cost for open access, which is mandated by funders now.
Yes, exactly. So it is. So you've got to put that in. $7,500 US is a lot of money. It's almost 10,000 Canadian. So be aware of that. The other thing is when you take your lab people to conferences, after you pay the registration, the fees, and the travel and the accommodation, it can be significant. We've just come back from ERS, Simon, and I had 3 or 4 of my lab members, and in total, it's probably around, including myself, it's probably around $15,000, $15,000 to $20,000. But so you've got a budget for that in your grants.
Yes.
So be careful for that as well.
I've had a hard time buying computers and buying licenses. For example, GraphPad Prism. Now there's the AI licenses or translation services such as DeepL, Claude AI, GraphPad Prism, SPSS. So those are things that your university, when they look at your budget and you try to use the money at the end of the day, they will hold you to what you wrote. And if you didn't write up a computer, you won't get a computer for your staff. So there's a lot of stuff that each grant you can start accumulating computers, licenses to make sure because these are the basic tools of our personnel. And I don't think we should ever cut on the computer line.
So again, my university, they have a license already for EndNote and GraphPad, but I have to pay for SPSS. R is free, but some of the other packages do cost. So just make sure that whatever you can get from university is fine, but you need to budget for licenses for sure.
And then, I mean, just going to say some stuff. Statistics, of course, if you have a statistical service, that's a very good investment of your money, and for the protocol and for the manuscript, of course. Ethics, when it's investigator-initiated, sometimes you can waive them. When it's pharma funded, you might get not waived. So look at that. We have a 2-tier system. If it's an academic study, I think it's a bit cheaper, like $700 or something. Same here.
But if it's an industry, it's about $3,500.
And then budget allocation. So I do you want to talk to us through a restricted, for example, where you're a restricted budget, where you have a commitment to buy something versus a flexible budget. Can you walk us through the difference?
So some of the federally funded, like CIHR, NIHR, these types of funding bodies, that what they will do is when you write your budget out, line item by line item, that you can only spend in that category. And if you often go above budget or something, then or buy something else or spend it on something else, they won't allow you to, saying it's restricted. And that can be difficult. And that's why when you write your budget, sometimes it's good to be slightly vague about something, or at least overcost it rather than undercost it. No one will have a problem when it's cheaper, but will have a problem if it's more expensive. And if possible, particularly for investigator-initiated studies or contract studies, is to make sure that your university at least is happy to keep your budget flexible, that you can use the money afterwards in whatever way you need to conduct your research. So that's a bit more flexible, and you don't have to argue for every line item on the budget.
So in my university, I need to negotiate in the contract that a statement states that the budget is flexible, and industry will usually allow that because they don't want to hear about your multiple budget requirements in the future.
Exactly.
So I had a question, Imran. I'm very poor at following my budget. So my coordinator and I look at it once every 1 or 2 years, and we see it's positive for the next 12 months, and we just
Very risky, Simon.
yeah, I know. I'm also thinking that some researchers told me the way to do research aggressively and competitively is always to be near empty, which I don't feel comfortable with. But I can understand the rationale that you should, if you're a business, you should always be investing capital in more research. But I'm not. Yeah. I'm too lazy, I guess. So how do you do it, Imran?
So the first thing is that our university, we have a health research services, and they keep a track on your account. So that's the first thing. And every month we get an update. We get a little link saying, okay, this is a link to all your accounts, and you can have a look easily how much you've got left. The other issue is that I have a meeting with somebody in our lab who manages all of our finances probably every 6 months, just to let us know what's in the accounts and what's closing and what's opening and how we're doing. One thing people often forget that, say you get a grant of $1 million. What will often happen is that $1 million will be split over 5 or 6 milestones. And every time you reach that milestone, you have to actually invoice the company. And somebody has to invoice it, your health, it's a whole process. And it's not as if, suddenly $1 million comes into your account. It'll happen drip by drip, step by step. So somebody has to keep on top of the milestones and the invoicing. Because otherwise, if you don't invoice, you won't get the money, even though you've got the grant or you've got this whatever. So it's very important that you keep on track of the invoicing and the milestone, or somebody does, because otherwise, you don't want to get to the end of the study and actually you had $1 million grant, but actually you've only claimed 400,000 because you've forgotten to invoice. So that's one of the big tips that I would tell you, is that make sure you invoice regularly and make sure your payments are appropriately and timely paid.
Yeah, so as a researcher, I also look at the milestone proposal from a company and negotiate with them to make sure I have upfront enough resources. They will usually give you 40% at the end of the study because they know that 50% of their studies funded or never get to the end. So they're happy to put a big lump at the end, but actually you need a big lump up front. That's negotiable. And as a researcher, I'm not very good with budgets at all, but I do keep an eye on milestones, and I know about my milestones, which actually drive me to recruit faster and get stuff done. Exactly. So you talked about donations earlier, Imran, and we're going to finish with this. We're coming at time. So donations, and as a clinician, so I'm not very successful with my patients. I'm never asking my patients for donations. However, we do work with a philanthropy, a charity specialist in our university who know people that are actively looking to give money, or your pharmaceutical companies. They have a donation stream as well to support up and coming researchers or a big center. So, do you want to talk about endowment strategies, or what do you do with donations?
Yeah, so you're right that. Again, I've never asked patients for donations or whatever.
No, me neither. I would never actually.
One of my patients randomly did decide to give me a donation. I won't tell you the amount. But then what happens to these donations, and it doesn't matter where the money's coming from. The donation can be what we call a spend down donation, where somebody gives you 50,000 or 100,000, and then you just spend the money as you would for any. And then the advancement office within your university will draw up a terms of reference or a contract with that donation or that charity or the foundation or whoever to how to use it. That's one way of using donations. The other way of using donations is to create an endowment. So say, for example, you have an endowment of, let's just make an endowment that somebody's donated to you, or a company or a pharmaceutical industry has given you a donation, a hands-off donation of, let's say, $1 million. What will happen is that your university will then put that into their endowment pot. And usually that endowment grows by maybe, let's just say, 6 or 7% every year. What they will give you is 4% of that, usually 4 or 5%. My university gives 4%. So that means on every $1 million that you have, they'll give you a minimum of 40,000 every year for the rest of existence.
Forever. I was in Oxford. It can be forever.
Forever. Exactly. Forever.
1,000 years in counting.
That's the whole point. The point is that endowments are long-lasting legacy, and you can add to that. But the other thing is, the hope is that $1 million, because you're not spending it, every year it will also grow a bit. So every year your 4% will also grow a bit. So, there's some people who have had 20 years ago, $1 million endowment, but after 20 years, it's grown and it's now 6, 7, 8 million.
Yes.
Over time.
And on that point, I think the important thing is, as a young researcher, of course, we want to spend money. But if you have the opportunity to approach partners, either philanthropy or industry or charities, charities can displace a part of their endowment to you, not you, but your university. I view it as it's like retiring strategy. So if you have a good endowment procedure or something, you don't need to ask 1 million up front. You can ask 100 per year for 3 years, and then every 3 years chase them up and say, "This is what I delivered. I'd like to continue that." And 2 or 3 partners, you set yourself up, and I think you're setting also up the next researchers in your position.
Absolutely, yeah. So you're creating this a regular stream of income, which will not only help you, but also it will help you to recruit the next big asthma superstar or next big cancer superstar who has some salary support or something that they can get going with. So this is something that just recently I've been thinking about more, and it will really help. And often I've only just learned about the process in the last 6 months to a year, but it is also something to aspire towards if it can happen.
My only top tip for that is, if you're getting a donation, make sure it's written donation directed to. The charity of your hospital or university will always prefer general donations, which they can handle according to their dean or CEO priority. But you can ask the donator to give it directed to your or to Airways, for example, research or whatever, kidney research. And then they have to respect the donor's wishes. So that's because your charities will prefer general donations. So, I mean, this is a strategy to make sure that, your donor gets what he wants. But if you don't tell them, then the general donation will never be part of your research.
Yeah, and usually the advancement, they'll create terms of reference or a contract to say, we're giving this amount of money. It's under the directorship of Dr. Simon Couillard for the Airways Disease Program at Sherbrooke, and so it is. The other thing which you can do also is when a charity or somebody gives a donation of, let's just say, $100,000, you can also ask your university to match that.
Yes, matching, yeah.
And they can do a virtual match as well. So they're not giving 100,000 cash up front. They already have a large endowment. Every university has large endowments, and then they can allocate a portion of that endowment towards you to match that.
Yes. And I'll finish by saying I'm going to get a health insurance on my head for the charity for my research chair. So the day Simon dies, the researcher there will get a nice little present from my estate, I guess. So I'll finish with that. I'd just like to say thank you, Imran, for your time. It's been really great discussing with you. I know you're busy, and I just thought that, sharing all these tips is important. And if you have a senior or a mid-career or early or older early career researcher with you in your hospital, like Imran, who knows how to do things, well, do bug them and ask them to budget tips on your budgets.
Yeah, definitely. And people do reach out to me as well and say, can you have a look at this and what do you think of this? And I often say, well, you haven't accounted for X, Y, and Z. You should think about this.
Great. And I'll finish by opening up for the next episode. So Imran will be saying goodbye. Maybe we'll get you back at another time.
No problems. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the listeners.
The next episode will bring in some guests from a recent paper on startup funding and startup packages from junior researchers. So we're going to revisit episode 1 content, but with actually evidence. So I guess we're evidence-based doctors. So that's the plan. And afterwards, after Christmas, we'll likely be talking about team and student management. So how do you build and manage your team to make them happy and keep them happy? So thank you again, Imran, and everyone have a lovely day, and talk to you in December.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.